The watch was the last thing she had left of him. Laurel Dempsey stood at the counter of Hartfield Pawn and Trade on a Tuesday morning, holding her father's watch in both hands the way you'd hold something breakable. It was a Seiko Field watch, Army issue, the kind they gave to soldiers who were going somewhere the Army didn't officially talk about. Her father had worn it every day for 23 years. When he died, he wasn't wearing it. It had been sitting on the nightstand at the hospice, wound tight, still keeping time. She'd slipped it off the table and into her coat pocket before anyone could ask her about it. That had been 4 years ago. She hadn't worn it herself. She wasn't sure she had the right. But she'd kept it on her kitchen windowsill, between a dead succulent and a coffee mug she never used, so she could see it every morning when the light came through. Now she was standing in a pawn shop in Peterborough, Ontario, trying to figure out what it was worth. The man behind the counter was named Kowalczyk. She could see the name on a laminated tag clipped to his flannel shirt. He was heavy-set and careful, the kind of person who handled objects the way they deserved to be handled. He'd taken the watch from her without rushing, turned it over, examined the case back with a loupe. "Military issue," he said. "Yes." "Yours?" She hesitated just long enough for it to mean something. "My father's." Kowalczyk set the watch down on a square of dark velvet. He didn't say anything for a moment, and she was grateful for that. Laurel was 31 years old. She had a nursing degree from Trent, 7 years of experience in critical care, and $48 in her checking account. She had a lease that expired in 12 days. She had a phone with a cracked screen and 3 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize and 1 voicemail from her landlord that she hadn't listened to yet because she already knew what it said. She had the watch. She'd driven to the pawn shop because she couldn't think of anything else to do, and she couldn't think of anything else to do because the thing that was supposed to save her, the thing that was supposed to be her career, her stability, her proof that all of it had been worth it, had been taken from her 6 weeks ago by a woman named Director Elaine Stroud, who had signed the termination papers without making eye contact and slid them across the desk with 2 fingers like she was passing a napkin. Misconduct. That was what the papers said. Laurel had read the word 4 times before. It started to feel like something in a language she didn't speak. She had not committed misconduct. She had reported it. The Peterborough Regional had been her hospital for 5 years. She'd started as a staff nurse in the cardiac unit, moved to the ICU after 2 years, and somewhere along the way had become the person other nurses called when a situation was going sideways and they needed someone who wouldn't panic. She was good at her job. She knew she was good at her job the way you know something you've never had to say out loud. The problem had started in November when she noticed the medication log discrepancies. Not big ones at first. A variance here, a missing entry there. The kind of thing you could chalk up to exhaustion or a documentation error, except that they kept happening, and they kept happening on the same unit, and they kept happening around the same set of patient files. When she flagged it to her charge nurse, she was told to resubmit the forms and not to worry about it. She worried about it. She spent 3 weeks cross-referencing shift reports on her days off. She wasn't supposed to have access to some of those files, but she had the login credentials from a colleague who'd asked her to cover a documentation gap months before and never revoked them. She used them twice. She found what she was looking for. Controlled substances were being redirected. Not a lot, not enough to trigger an automatic audit, but consistently and deliberately, and the trail led back to a senior administrator named Brendan Holst, who managed procurement for the entire East Wing and who, she would later learn, had been doing this for 2.5 years. She submitted a formal report to the Provincial Regulatory College in January. She included everything: dates, amounts, file numbers, the access logs she'd printed. She sent a copy to Health Canada. She kept a copy for herself in a folder on her laptop and a second copy on a USB drive she'd mailed to her own mother's address in Sudbury without explaining why. In February, she was called into Director Stroud's office. Brendan Holst was there. So was someone from HR she'd never met. The misconduct allegation was about the unauthorized access, not about Holst, about her. She'd walked out of that building in the snow without her security badge, carrying a cardboard box of her desk things, and she hadn't cried until she got to her car. Then she'd cried for a long time. Kowalczyk was still looking at the watch. A door opened at the back of the shop, and a man came in from the alley, holding a coffee in one hand and a leash in the other. The leash was attached to a Belgian Malinois, compact, alert, wearing a working dog vest in dark green. The dog came through the door at a controlled trot and stopped immediately when it sensed the room, ears forward, scanning. The man was maybe 40, wearing a gray Henley and cargo pants, with the kind of posture that didn't come from a gym. He said something quietly to the dog, not a command exactly, more like a check-in, and the dog relaxed a single degree. "Sorry," the man said to Kowalczyk. "I'll wait." He moved toward the side wall where a rack of guitars hung. The dog moved with him, then stopped. The dog was looking at the watch, not at Laurel, at the watch on the velvet square. It was a strange thing to witness. The animal went still in a particular way, not frozen, not alarmed, but focused in the way a dog is focused when it recognizes something it has been trained to recognize. It took 2 steps toward the counter, stopped again, and made a low sound that wasn't quite a whine. "Ridley." The man's voice was quiet but precise. The dog sat, but it kept its eyes on the watch. Laurel looked at the man. He was looking at the watch too now. Something had changed in his face. "Can I ask," he said, not to Kowalczyk, to her, "where you got that?" She opened her mouth to say something deflecting, some version of "that's not really your business," but something in his tone stopped her. He wasn't being aggressive. He was being careful, the same way Kowalczyk had been careful. "My father," she said. "He was in the army." The man set down his coffee on the edge of a display case. He reached into the back pocket of his cargo pants and pulled out a wallet, and from the wallet he took a small laminated card. He placed it on the counter next to the watch without touching either one. It was a unit identification card. Joint Task Force 2, her father's unit. She looked at it for a long time. Ridley was trained to recognize JTF-2 equipment, the man said. "The vests, the gear, the watches too. It's a scent and visual association. She hasn't done it in almost 2 years, not since I retired." He paused. "Who was your father?" "Sergeant Warren Dempsey," she said. "He died in 2021. The man was quiet for a moment. "Then, I served with him, in 2014. He was the best field medic I ever saw work." Laurel gripped the edge of the counter. She had not expected this. She had expected $40 or $50 and a receipt and the long drive home to an apartment she couldn't keep and a situation she couldn't solve. She had not expected this. "My name is Callister Brine," the man said. "I'm sorry. Can I ask why you're selling it?" And that was the moment she could have said, "I don't want to get into it," or "it's complicated," or any of the other things she'd been saying for 6 weeks. She didn't. She was too tired, and the dog was still sitting there watching the watch with that grave, steady attention, and something about it made lying feel impossible. She told him everything. She talked for 20 minutes. Kowalczyk disappeared quietly into the back. The dog, Ridley, lay down at the base of the counter with her chin on her paws and did not move and did not look away. Callister Brine listened the way soldiers listen, without interrupting, without shifting, taking in everything and filing it away. When she finished, he asked 2 questions. The first was whether she still had the documentation. The second was whether she had a lawyer. She said yes to the first and no to the second. "Okay," he said. That was all he said, but the word landed differently than she expected. Not dismissive, more like a man who had just identified the problem and was already working through the steps. "I'm not in the position to tell you what to do," he said, "but I know some people who work on exactly this kind of thing. Healthcare workers who've been pushed out for whistleblowing. There's a clinic, a legal aid clinic, in Ottawa, run through the University of Ottawa Law School. They've handled regulatory college complaints. They know the provincial protections." He took out his phone and wrote something down on the back of a receipt from his jacket pocket. "And I know a journalist. She covers health policy for the Globe. She's been working on a series about hospital administration for 8 months. I don't know if your situation fits what she's looking at, but I think you should let her decide that." Laurel looked at the piece of paper. A name, Taya Albright. A number. "You don't have to do anything with that," he said. "But your father spent his career making sure people had options. Seems worth giving you one." She folded the paper and put it in her coat pocket. Kowalczyk came back out with 2 cups of coffee. She didn't know why that made her want to cry, but it did. The simple practicality of it, the assumption that this was a conversation worth fueling. She stayed another hour. She did not call Tay Albright that day, or the next. She drove back to Peterborough with the watch in her bag and the receipt in her coat, and Callister Brine's number in her phone under a contact she labeled JTF2. Ridley's person, because she couldn't think of what else to call him. She spent 2 days going through the documentation again. She'd been over it so many times that the file numbers had started to feel like a foreign language. But she went through it again anyway, methodically, pulling out everything she'd sent to the regulatory college and everything she'd kept for herself. She made a new index. She noted every date. She found 2 entries she hadn't cross-referenced before. Small things, invoice discrepancies from a supply company that, when she looked it up, turned out to have been dissolved in 2022. The invoices were dated 2023. That was new. She called the legal aid clinic in Ottawa on a Wednesday morning. A student lawyer named Femi picked up, and she gave him the summary version, and he said the words she hadn't heard anyone say in 6 weeks. This sounds like it may fall under the Ontario whistleblower protections. Can you send me the documentation? She sent it. She called Taya Albright on a Thursday. The journalist listened without interrupting, which was becoming a pattern in Laurel's life, and which she was starting to understand meant something, that the story was coherent, that it tracked, that it wasn't something a person could dismiss by half paying attention. The dissolved supply company, Albright said. That's interesting. That's very interesting. I need to look at those invoices. I can send them. Can I ask you something first? A pause. Are you aware that Brendan Holst left the hospital? Laurel was not aware of this. He took a position in March with a private healthcare management firm based in Mississauga. They contract with 7 hospitals in Ontario. The silence on the line was long. So he's still in the system, Laurel said. He's in a better position in the system, Albright said, with more procurement authority than he had at Peterborough Regional. Laurel sat with that for a moment. Send me the invoices, Albright said, and the access logs, if you have them. I want to have our legal team look at the question of the unauthorized access before we go further. I don't want you to take on more risk than you already are. But I'm not going anywhere with this, Laurel. I've been looking for the thread that ties this network together for 8 months. The regulatory college complaint moved slowly, the way those things do. Femi worked methodically, filings responses, requesting disclosure, navigating the procedural machinery with a patience Laurel found both reassuring and maddening. She understood why it had to be this way. Understanding it didn't make the waiting easier. She got a job at a walk-in clinic in Lindsay. Not ICU work, scheduling appointments, doing intake assessments, occasionally helping a harried physician with minor procedures when things backed up. The pay was less than half what she'd made at the hospital. The work was fine. The people were kind. She drove 40 minutes each way and listened to podcasts about things that had nothing to do with her situation, and sometimes that helped and sometimes it didn't. Callister Brine checked in every 2 weeks. Not pushy, just a text, usually late in the evening. How are things going? Ridley says hello. She texted back. Sometimes more than the situation required, because he was one of the few people she could talk to about any of this without having to explain the context from scratch. He told her once, late in a conversation that had started about the regulatory process and somehow ended up about her father, that Warren Dempsey had been the kind of medic who remembered the details of every soldier he'd treated. Not just the injury, but the person, the name of their dog, whether they took sugar in their coffee. He said it like it was a professional observation, but there was something underneath it that Laurel recognized as grief. Carefully managed, she understood that too. Albright's piece ran on a Saturday morning in October, 11 months after Laurel had first flagged the discrepancies. It was not a small story. It ran on the front page of the Globe's national section, with a secondary piece on the opinion page and a data visualization of the supply chain irregularities that Albright's team had reconstructed over 8 months. The dissolved company was part of a billing scheme that had touched 4 hospitals and redirected, by Albright's accounting, approximately $2.3 million in procurement funds over 5 years. Brendan Holst was named. So were 2 other administrators. The private management firm in Mississauga was named. The regulatory college was named, with a sharp paragraph about the inversion of its complaint process. Laurel was named too, not as a villain, as the person who'd found it. She read the piece 3 times on her phone at her kitchen table, the watch on the windowsill, catching the morning light, and she did not cry this time. She felt something more complicated than crying, a kind of exhausted relief, the particular sensation of having carried something heavy for so long that you'd forgotten your body without it, and now it was down, and you were still standing. The Ontario Ministry of Health opened an investigation within 2 weeks of the piece running. The Regulatory College reversed its finding against Laurel in December, citing a procedural review. The letter used careful language. It did not say we were wrong, but the effect was the same. The finding was struck. Her license was unencumbered. Peterborough Regional offered her a meeting. She went because Femi advised it and because she was curious. Director Stroud was not in the meeting. Laurel would later learn she'd taken a leave of absence in November. The new interim director was a soft-spoken man who told Laurel that the hospital considered the matter resolved and hoped she would consider the possibility of returning. She thanked him for his time and told him she'd think about it. She was still thinking about it when, 3 weeks later, she got a call from a nurse recruiter she'd registered with in the spring. A position had opened up in the ICU at Ottawa Civic. Critical care, permanent full-time, the kind of role that would have been the next step from where she'd been. The recruiter had flagged her file because of her experience, and because, apparently, the Globe piece had been circulating in health hiring circles in a way that had complicated her story in the original sense of the word, made it more full, more dimensional. She took the interview. She got the job. She moved to Ottawa in January, to a one-bedroom apartment in Centretown that she found because a colleague of Femi's knew someone subletting the way things in Ottawa worked through the particular circulatory system of people who knew each other. She put the watch back on the windowsill, between a new succulent and a mug she actually used this time. On her first day at Ottawa Civic, she parked in the staff lot and sat in her car for a few minutes. Not because she was nervous, she was, but that wasn't it. But because she wanted to remember what this had cost. Not to carry it forward as bitterness, but as information, as a kind of calibration. She had been careful once, and she would be careful again, and this time she would also know that careful was not always enough, and that you sometimes needed someone to walk through a door at the right moment and have a dog that recognized what you were carrying before you could explain it. She texted Callister Brine before she went inside. First day, Ottawa Civic ICU. He replied in 4 minutes. Your dad would have been proud. Ridley, too. She put her phone in her pocket and walked through the doors. Femi won a Provincial Law Society commendation for his work on the case. Albright was shortlisted for a national newspaper award. The management firm in Mississauga lost 4 of its 7 hospital contracts and was the subject of an ongoing audit that, as of the following spring, had not yet concluded. Brendan Holt's case was referred to the Ontario Provincial Police. Laurel did not follow the proceedings closely. She had enough to think about at work. A new unit, new colleagues, the particular texture of a different ICU with its own rhythms and its own institutional memory. She was good at learning new systems. She had always been good at that. She kept the watch. She didn't put it back in her pocket or wear it on her wrist. It stayed on the windowsill, where she could see it in the morning when the light came in. It seemed right that it should stay there, not hidden, not gone, not sold for something she needed in a week of desperation, but visible, present. Her father had been a medic and a soldier, and a man who remembered the names of dogs. He had given 23 years to a job that asked everything and returned very little that could be measured in a document. He had kept his watch wound tight and running. She thought she understood now why he'd done that. Time wasn't something you saved up. It was something you kept account of every day, even when the days were the kind you'd rather not count, especially then. She wound the watch on Sunday mornings. It was a small thing. It was also the most important thing she did all week.